Okay, guys, today I'm going to talk about public goods. A public good is anything that would be more efficiently produced by the government than it would be produced by the free market acting on its own. That's why we say that all public goods are, by definition, examples of market failures. In other words, and a market failure is any situation in which the free market on its own doesn't work efficiently. So actually, with a public good, we're going to have the government step in and provide that thing. Now, just because government provides something doesn't make it a public good. Right? So if the government, here my example is coffee, but let's say the government has a program providing everyone with free 51-inch TV screens before the Super Bowl. Now, that would be really nice, I guess. I don't know if that would be a good program. I think that would probably be a bad program. It'd be costly. But that's not, that wouldn't make televisions a public good. Right, it would just make them something that the government provides. Public goods actually have to satisfy certain criteria, at least one of the ones that we're going to go over. So let's go over those. Okay, so I'm going to actually just sort of skip by some of the things that could be public goods, try not to get dizzy while I zoom in and all that good stuff. So here's some criteria. One, if the good would attract free riders unless the government taxed everyone to provide it. So we talked about free riders in class a little bit. This means that if we just left it up to people to buy, so some people might buy it, but other people would probably refuse to buy it because they could just take advantage of other people buying it. So for whatever reason, that is true in this circumstance, right? This wouldn't be true of TV screens because you can't free ride on your neighbor's TV screen unless he lets you in the house, right? So unless you're going to be like a creeper and stand outside the window. So, and don't do that. Number two, if it's difficult to assign property rights for the good. So this tends to be true of things that are sort of held in common, like the hallway in the school or the road, or a lake that a lot of people live around. So it's hard to assign property rights to the lake itself. The beachfront you can assign property rights, but maybe the lake or the fish in the lake or something like that. So if the good would cost an individual more than it would benefit him. So in other words, an individual will probably never buy it or produce it because it would never make economic sense. The cost would always outweigh the benefits. But if the government provided it, the cost would actually be less than the benefit. So this is true sometimes. And in this case, we would still want the government to provide it. If the costs are going to be less than the benefits, we want government to provide it. But if they don't, no one is going to. Most likely. And finally, if it would be really difficult to actually make people pay for how much they use. So again, this might be, we'll actually talk about some examples of this. All right, so what are some goods that would qualify under the first criterion here, the free rider criterion? So I'm going to go up to sort of a group of not randomly chosen goods that I've assembled and drawn some nice pictures for, if I don't say so myself. So what are some things that would attract free riders? Well, okay, if an individual actually constructed a road for his benefit, maybe a corporation does it for their benefit so they can transport their goods, it might be hard for them to keep people off the roads, maybe, so that could attract some free riders. Let's see, the justice system seems like a good candidate. Okay, so we have all these judges and police officers and this judicial system and law enforcement, and this benefits us because it helps protect our rights to life, our rights to our property, things like that, rights to do what we want with our property. For the most part. So our justice system helps us do that. And maybe one person, hires a personal police force and is charitable enough to use this police force. Well, even without charity, maybe he uses this police force to apprehend people who might offend against him or who have offended against him, by stealing his property or something like that. So he tries this person, he arrests him, he tries him, he throws him in a prison that he constructed, and that benefits him, but it also benefits all of us by keeping the criminal off the street. So the justice system easily attracts free riders. The military is another thing that attracts free riders because if there were no such thing as the government military, maybe border towns would actually, hire a defense company or start a militia or something like that. But all the interior areas, they would have an incentive just to free ride on those border towns. The border towns, they don't want to be invaded, and the interior towns don't want to be invaded either. But they're not going to be invaded unless the border towns are invaded first. So they can just rely on the border towns for the most part, and that would be free riding, and that would be bad. And the fire department is another thing. In a really rural area where everybody's houses are spread apart from each other, maybe not as big a deal because, if somebody doesn't pay for the private company doing, fire department service, then they don't get fire service protection. So if their house catches on fire, it burns to the ground. And we're sort of okay with that because it only affects that guy. And, who cares? He didn't pay. It's not very nice, but he didn't pay. So, you don't have a free rider problem. But, anywhere else, like in a city or in a suburb where people's buildings, houses are close together, if your neighbor's house catches fire, even if they didn't pay for the fire service and you did, you really want the firemen to come and put that fire out. So, everyone kind of has an incentive to rely on other people to buy fire department service. So instead, we provide it for the public. So those kinds of things would attract free riders. What about criteria number 2, which is it's difficult to assign property rights for it? Well, let's go back up here and see. Okay, so actually, the fire department is pretty easy to assign property rights, right? Like, so if you had a private company doing this, you just pay them, and they know that it's your house that they need to protect. Now, there's a free rider problem, but we're not worried about that for this criterion. And for the justice system, again, it's pretty hard. Here, it would be, maybe you have a list of people who paid into the system, and those guys, if somebody commits a crime against them, then you arrest the criminal, but otherwise you don't arrest the criminal. But it still benefits people who aren't signed up for the system by keeping criminals off the street. So, not really the same. But there are a couple things that would be really hard. For example, fisheries. So there are certain areas where there are lots of fish. So fishing is really popular, and fishing companies or fishing people go there to fish. And, if the free market were left on its own, they might fish too much. Okay, so they might, take too many fish out of there and actually ruin the fishery. So maybe make the fish go extinct in that area or something like that. Because nobody has an incentive to stop, if they're overfishing, because the other guys are still going to keep on fishing. So you might as well keep on going. So because there's no, if one person owned the fishery, then that would be much better. But let's say this fishery is held in common. So there is actually a reason for the government to step in and say, okay, well, we're going to limit the number of fish that you can get. Okay, it's hard to assign property rights to fish. They swim around. Right? So you can own a piece of a fishery even. But those fish, they don't stay in one place. Same thing with the public pool. So, it's a common good. So the first person jumps in, no problem. A second person can jump in, no problem. Depending on the size of the pool, once you get to the 60th person, that 60th person might still want to jump in because it's better to be in the pool than out. But by jumping in, he kind of makes life worse for the 59 previous people, and that's going to just continue and continue until the pool is inefficiently filled with people. So it actually makes sense for somebody to step in and say, wait, let's set a limit to how many people can go in the pool. All right, now what about criterion number 3? The good would cost an individual more than it would benefit him, but its total cost would be less if the government provides it. So we still want it to happen, but people are probably just not going to do it on their own. Well, a lot of these qualify for this. For example, basic research. So these are the kinds of things this is often done on university campuses using government money. But these are just researchers asking very basic questions, and if they find the answers, it's not going to lead to a profitable product right away, but eventually it will many years down the road. Now, most companies are not willing to do basic research because it's not profitable. And even once you do the research, everyone else can benefit from it too. So there's not much of a profit motive for you to do that. But we still want it to happen because that basic research is kind of necessary before there can be innovations and new technologies and stuff like that. So basic research is one of those areas. Roads are another area because roads, it turns out, are very, very expensive. And it would be unlikely that an individual would be like, well, I really want to get from here to Grand Rapids, so I'm going to build I-96. It would be unlikely even for a company to do that, right? So, but it turns out that we still want those things. It's still more efficient to pay for them and have them than not to have them, but only if the government does it. All right, so finally, what about criterion number 4? So it would be difficult to charge individual consumers efficiently. So going back up to our group of goods here, and it's a little off on a tilt, but that's okay. Again, we talked about you could do this with the justice system and the fire department. Okay. And actually, you could charge somebody at the gate for coming into the public pool, and same thing for the fishery. Just for a license to fish, you have to buy a little bit. You have to pay a little bit of money. But it would be really difficult for things like roads. Now, I know we have toll roads, and we have a gas tax and stuff like that. But those things are not perfect, right? The gas tax doesn't hit people based on, for example, how much they actually wear down the road. So, big trucks and stuff like that. And it doesn't really, there are sort of ways around paying tolls. You're not going to have a toll every 5 minutes or a toll booth every 5 minutes that forces you to pay. So maybe improving technology actually would make it possible for us to charge people by how much they use the roads. But right now it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. It would be hard to charge people individually for that. So that's an example of that. It would be hard to charge people individually for their use of that resource. So this is sort of all about public good. So I want you to remember that in order to be a public good, we have to satisfy, or the good has to satisfy one or more of these criteria, as all of these do. And people do get into debates about what it is that's a public good. For example, many of you will probably think that preventive health care is a public good or something like that. And those spawn big debates. But something is not a public good just because you think it should be a public good, or it would be nice to provide everyone with that. It's got to satisfy some criterion that makes it a market failure. Okay, has to be a market failure, and that makes it a public good.